Hi, everybody. This is something new that we're trying here on RCFB in conjunction with Reddit itself as well as Advanced Media. They have a podcast called NIL Now, and this is an opportunity to have a live discussion with special guests and individuals from across the college football landscape. Advance has many major papers, many of which you've all heard of in the college football world: AL.com, MLive.com, OregonLive.com, PennLive.com, MassLive, Syracuse.com, and many others. And, today we're actually being joined by a reporter from the Cleveland Plain Dealer. I'm going to actually defer to my colleague to give you a little bit more description of that. So we're allowing this to populate. We want to hear from you. We're going to get as many of you up here to ask questions and give your thoughts on this entire field. Again, many of you may know our guests, and I'll go ahead and check. Dean, are you up here?
Yes, I am up here. How's everybody doing? All right. Yeah,
good. I'm sure our audience is ready here. So tell us about who we're going to be talking to today.
Sure, absolutely. Just a little, description of NIL Now, the podcast now in collaboration with Reddit. We've been under Headline Studio. We have 8 episodes up already, all about name, image, and likeness, the trending stories, the trending topics that are shaping the world of college football. It's been specifically college football. We've been talking, our most recent episode was about, high school NIL, and we've talked about basketball as well. But it's mainly been college football, and that's what makes, collaborating with Reddit College Football so exciting. But we have 8 episodes up so far. Our co-hosts are Lauren Sisler, a sideline reporter for ESPN, and Kevin Jones, a former first-round draft pick of the Detroit Lions. He was also an All-American running back at Virginia Tech. So 2 very knowledgeable people in sports media on, the topics surrounding college football and name, image, and likeness. But 2 of our guests today were actually guests on the show. First, I'm going to introduce Doug Lesmerises. Doug is a sports columnist for Cleveland.com and the host of Buckeye Talk podcast. Doug covered Ohio State for Cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer as a beat reporter from 2005 to 2016. And the FWAA named him Beat Writer of the Year in 2011. And as far as NIL stories go, he broke the news that Ryan Day said Ohio State would need $13 million in NIL to stay intact. So, Doug, if you are there and you want to turn on your mic and you want to just say, how's it going? We are super excited to have you on today.
Doug just needed to be let back on stage. I see him right now. Doug, when you're here, just go ahead and hit unmute. We'd love to hear from you.
Hey, everybody. I can do all the NIL stuff. I just can't work technology. So thanks for bearing with me. Yeah, the NIL conversation is fascinating. I try to think about when I was at that June event with Ryan Day, the Ohio State coach, and what he said then. I think about when NIL first popped up, 12, 18, 24 months ago, and the conversations that people were having and how different it is now. It's a completely different animal. So it's changed. National Signing Day is next week. It's changing how National Signing Day is operating in college football. It's changing how recruiting is operating. It's not what I think a lot of people expected. I think the people who are ahead of the game right now maybe had a better handle on what it would be. But even the people involved at the various highest levels right now don't have a handle on it, which makes it frustrating, I think, for a lot of people, but also makes it fun and interesting, which is, I think, why we're here.
Absolutely. Doug, I have to ask you a question. How, in your opinion, from what you've seen, what are your thoughts on NIL after a couple of years of seeing it in action?
The good part of it is good and the bad part of it is bad. The good part of it is amateur college athletes who previously had their earning power limited by archaic NCAA rules can now make money. And no part of that is bad. When you look back in the past and see the way things operated before and the things that players were suspended for before under the old NCAA rules, and you think about things now, and it's like, man, why did it take so long to get here? But the lack of leadership by the NCAA, the foot dragging by the NCAA, that they never want to do anything progressive until they have to, until a court case forces them, until society forces them, until somebody else, an outside pressure forces them to evolve, they don't evolve. And so then when they do evolve, it's messy and it's chaotic and much more so than it needs to be. And it's interesting that we're having this conversation on the day that the NCAA hours ago just announced a new NCAA president. It's like, finally, you think maybe you need somebody in charge of this thing? So players getting money, good. The way it's happening, the people who are in charge of it, the lack of oversight. And again, it's not that you want to prevent anything, but everything needs structure. You need a little structure, man. And so the implementation stinks. And it's an embarrassment for the leadership of the NCAA and the people who are in charge of this multi-gazillion-dollar business. But I do think we have to remember these are athletes who have been putting in time and energy and putting their brains and bodies on the line, and they're finally being compensated. And that's good.
Well said, Doug. And we are going to have a lot of fun today talking all about that. Our other guest is Ben Chase, who joined us on one of our previous episodes on NIL Now as well. Ben is a graduate of George Washington University's law school. He is also a college football superfan who is on his way to breaking, you all may have seen him on Twitter, but he's on his way to breaking the record for most college football games attended in a season. He's driving around doing it all in his car. And he is also an NIL consultant. He was at the NIL Summit last summer. And he has a pretty strong grasp on what's going on in the world of college football as well. So, Ben, if you could unmute your mic and tell us how you're feeling about everything. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, the mic monster. We always like to joke about this. We'll let Ben kind of figure that out, or should we just do,
No, I got it. I'm here. Thanks. Yeah, I clicked it and then I pulled up this thing on the side. Anyways, thank you guys for having me on. A little bit about me. I've worked in the NIL space since November 5th of last year. I've helped launch 7 collectives. I've helped do deals for Drew Timmy, Chet Holmgren, and to name a few. And now I consult for some collectives behind the scenes, as well as I've worked with student athletes and helped them on this trip. I'm on this crazy college football road trip. I've been to 60 games at 60 different stadiums. I've met ADs and athletic directors and helped talk to them a little bit while I'm on this trip. But mostly my trip is about telling the story of college football, which a lot of you have seen. I post weekly in the college football Reddit, kind of giving updates and asking about advice. Grateful for being here, and obviously I'll leave it up for you guys to ask any questions to any of us, and I'll chime in. I've worked with student athletes, alumni, building out collectives, dollars and cents. When they were mentioned earlier, the $13 million at Ohio State, like that's, I've been in rooms and heard the jabber on the other side from all parties. So just grateful for the invite.
And Ben, just real quick, I do have a question for you right off the bat. I guess what game are you most looking forward to on your trip schedule in the coming weeks for bowl season? And one more, I guess, just as an NIL question, how do you feel about it? We heard Doug say, this is obviously a good thing that student athletes have the opportunity to be paid now. What is your kind of stance on it from someone who has built up some of these collectives?
Yeah, okay, so answer your first question, games. So I got 17 games left. The national championship is obviously like the big finale, but honestly, like tomorrow's the Cure Bowl, and it's, the only 2 teams that are facing off that have won their conference. They're both on 10-game winning streaks, UTSA and Troy, and that's in my hometown of Orlando. It's in a soccer stadium, so that's kind of cool. And then, there's a few others on the list, getting to see teams that I've seen in the past. But, honestly, the Celebration Bowl, seeing, I think it'll be Deion's last game coaching, and then before he moves to Colorado. So that's kind of exciting. And then back to your NIL question. So I was in college at UF when, I don't know if you guys remember, the kicker at UCF, his name, I know his YouTube name is Destroying, but he was in an issue. I think he was the backup kicker, and he had a confrontation with the team and about he could either monetize his YouTube channel. At that time, I had, I think, 300,000 subscribers, or stay on the team. And it was a big back and forth. And I think this was 2012, 2013 there. And then because of all the media that behind it, he went from 30,000 followers to 300,000 subscribers. And obviously, it was an easy decision to just drop the team and move on with building out his brand. And that was between that and of like, if I'm a freshman non-athlete and I room with a freshman athlete and we both have YouTube channels or whatever, and about pancakes, right? And I can make money off my pancake YouTube channel and the student athlete cannot. How is that fair? So that's kind of where the origin of this came from. And now with collectives and stuff, going back to that, there's, as long as, there is a quid pro quo and there's a, building out of some kind of very transparent, deal between parties, I have no issues with it. And it's one of those things where the teams that are at the top right now were already at the top, 5 years ago. So it's not like we're seeing, some team, Stanford or Yale or Harvard skyrocket to the top of recruiting. It's it's the same Harvard. I mean, Alabama's about to have their 10th number one class under Saban right now. So, I'm excited to see, there's student athletes that have done some great things with NIL and giving back to the community. And, there's, gymnasts that, have 3-4 million followers on TikTok and on social that have leveraged that into, life-changing money. And that's what this is all about.
Yeah, you brought up a good point about, branding and how student athletes can make money, just based on how many followers they have and use social media to their advantage. And on next week's episode of NIL Now, we'll actually have someone who works on that side of things with branding athletes and helping them promote themselves. So that is going to be fun on next week's episode of NIL Now. But Doug, I did have a question for you. As someone who has covered, so closely a top college football program and, seeing the significance of National Signing Day and seeing the significance of the transfer portal kind of grow in different ways. In some way, does NIL and how popular NIL and the transfer portal have become, does it almost make National Signing Day and getting these high school recruits, does it make it like less significant, if that makes sense? Does the transfer portal become more powerful because of NIL, and does that hurt, high school recruits in a way?
No, because the high school recruits are getting hundreds of thousands of dollars to sign out of high school schools. So that is, when Ryan Day, and again, I'm looking at this through an Ohio State lens because I've covered Ohio State football for 18 years, but it's a big time college football team. So I think everybody understands that what happens there happens in a lot of places. When Ryan Day was talking in June, he said $13 million. That in his mind was to keep the current roster intact. That's to make sure that players on the team have NIL compensation and are not being poached by other schools who could offer more NIL. But when Ryan Day spoke recently, in the last day or two, he said in high school recruiting, it had been that NIL was part of the conversation for high school recruits. And he said now it is becoming the conversation for high school recruits. And why wouldn't it be? Now you're not exactly supposed to pay recruits directly and say, hey, here's your money to come to our school. But nobody at the NCAA is overseeing or enforcing anything. So that's what's happening. And that's great, right? That's great for players who have that opportunity to get that kind of money right off the bat coming out of high school. But it has not completely changed because, as Charlie said, right, most of the best schools are still competing at the highest level in recruiting. But that idea, that sort of here, come play here, but it's an outside collective that's not really supposed to work with the school, but they kind of do work with the school. They're going to get you the money, but are you sure you're going to get the money? And how does that collective get the money? And fans have to give money to the collective. Like all those parts. Yes, the transfer portal matters, obviously. And there's a direct connection between freedom of movement for players, which is also good, and the ability to be paid, which is also good. And those two are related to each other. But it's still, I think, high school recruiting is the number one thing. Because if you look, in the portal, it's still, Bryce Young won the Heisman last year. He didn't go in the portal to try to seek the highest bid to go somewhere else. Now, we can come back and have a conversation when that happens. It happened with Jordan Addison last year, the Pitt receiver who was the Blutnikoff Award winner. But can you imagine someone at an even higher level? That's really high-level player. But even above that, what if Caleb Williams won the transfer portal tomorrow and was open for business and somebody gave him $20 million to go somewhere? Like that could happen. If Caleb Williams wanted to do that, that would be allowed to happen. Imagine that. How people would react in college football. So yes, it matters in the transfer portal, but what's really happening right now is it is mattering a lot in high school recruiting. And for now, high school recruiting is still the lifeblood of all the best teams.
Absolutely. It's interesting, Doug. I just saw an article as I was kind of prepping for today that after that Heisman victory, Caleb Williams' value was put at like $3 million, something in that range. And he's got another season left. But then all of a sudden, looking back, and I don't know how these valuations are being made. I assume there's some people with a little bit like the folks who set gambling lines. I'm like, they must know a little bit more than I do about some of this stuff. Finance was never my thing. However, hearing that $13 million number suddenly doesn't seem as outrageous with some of the numbers that are being thrown out for these top players. And as you just said, a program like an Ohio State that pulls in that talent, or Texas, or obviously Texas A&M for better or worse there, and some of these other programs that are pulling in these players. It's interesting to see the numbers that are being bandied about. Of course, we'll see how the ROI, return on investment, or radio on the internet, for those of you Silicon Valley fans, how that actually works out in practice. But this has been a really interesting thing to observe, especially, how dynamic and active this news cycle is on all of it.
Well, and the issue is that NIL is really multiple different things all at once. And so the valuation, you have a 3 million, I don't even know what that means. Like, you look at how many Twitter followers somebody has. People always talk about like monetizing your social media followers. Like, that's one thing. That's great. I can remember, again, when this was first getting started, I was talking to people and they were saying like, oh, can you imagine like if college athletes can do cameos and have somebody pay them $50 to say happy birthday to somebody? It's like, yeah, that's great. But also, as we sit here now, that seems like incredibly naive, because yes, for some athletes, that's what it's about. It's like making money off your presence. There's a valuation of how many people care about what you say, right? You're influential on social media. That's something. But then there's also boosters paying you money to come play sports at their school, which is an entirely different operation. And frankly, in college football, like, that's the deal right now. All the others, the other stuff is great, but that's not really what the conversation is right now. So that idea, like that, I think people were ready for the let's allow athletes again, the idea, you had a YouTube channel a decade ago, and the NCAA was like, don't make any ads on your YouTube channel because you're an amateur. It feels like caveman times. It's ridiculous. So that is gone is great. But the idea that it's like an unfettered, uncapped, unknown, unregulated world of boosters or fans, money to a collective hundreds of thousands of dollars to a high school player to get them to come to that school. It's not that the high school player shouldn't get that money, but how is there zero oversight? How is it are all outside people who aren't employed by athletic departments are doing all of that exchange of money? Fans are giving money to the collectives. They don't really know much about the collectives or what the collectives are doing. How is that the process? Yes, let people make money off their Twitter accounts, but my gosh, how can we have unregulated payment of 18-year-olds to attend a school?
I was going to say, Doug, I'm sure you remember Jeremy Bloom, the Colorado football player / skier who had to pick skiing. And to his benefit, he was an exceptional skier, but that was the classic. That was the poster child for all of this. The guy was really good skier and also on the Colorado football team. And the NCAA said, look, you're going pro as a skier. You got to quit football because you're suddenly a pro athlete and you're getting compensated, which was absurd at the time. And I know he's applauded the change in the NIL cycle, but for those of us who were around, gosh, that was ages ago. I looked it up. It was, I think, 20 years ago, but it's amazing the sort of things that we were seeing back in the day.
The NCAA loves to say no, but they have no idea how to oversee the yes. It is an embarrassing organization. The lack of forethought, the lack of leadership, the lack of structure. They punted all this NIL stuff to individual state legislatures. There are athletic directors and coaches in universities around the country waiting for federal intervention. They want Congress. Congress kind of has a lot to do because they have a country to run, but Congress is also supposed to come up with a national NIL law, because the organization that exists to oversee this sport, to oversee athletics at the college level, has completely abandoned its job. It may as well be an empty building in Indianapolis. So that you abandoned it to that extent. All they did for years was say, hey, skier, hey, YouTube guy, hey, don't put too much cream cheese on your bagel, or we're going to have somebody come investigate you. They love the no. And now that we're in a world of yes that was forced upon them, they're like, oh, well, not our thing. It's an embarrassment. And it's not ruining. I mean, some people are like, oh, it's going to ruin college football. Listen, Saturdays are fun, man. Everybody loves it. But this is where we are is an indictment of everything the NCAA is about.
And Doug, to your point, a lot of people do have the opinion that, the NCAA not doing anything for so long has kind of pushed NIL to a point where, people don't know what the right decision to make would be for how you kind of level the playing field. For Charlie Baker, for him to step into this role, that'll be in March, the new NCAA president, what are you looking for him to tackle right away? Like there are a lot of issues. What do you think are some of the biggest ones that he needs to get down to business right away with?
There's so many issues. I mean, the main thing that the NCAA should be in charge of and should be worried about the most is the health and welfare of college athletes. So that is making sure that they are able to be compensated for their time and for the risks they take to play their sports. It should be to make sure that, they are able to have mental health balance and that they are able to, pursue their passions in a way that is productive for everybody involved. So, that is the number one thing. And I, if I had an idea, I would have applied to be the NCAA president because they haven't had one for a while. So that's the number one thing. But I do think you have to get down to the business of some structure of this NIL world. And the problem is that everything has happened with the NCAA in recent years, whether it's it's primarily the transfer portal and NIL, right? Everything happened in individual silos. Nothing was connected. So the idea that you have unfettered ability to move and unfettered ability to make as much money as you want from every single possible university that might have a collective, I do think there needs to be a cohesive way of connecting everything. And of course, the best way to do that would be have a players union where you collectively bargain between the universities and the athletic departments and the players, like you do in a professional sport, because guess what? College football is a professional sport. Like that would allow you to piece everything together. And you can't stop it anymore, so you have to regulate it. So like some idea of it, and now we're talking about, the ultimate change of college sports, and that's not what Charlie Baker is going to do on day one. But you've got to start thinking that way. You've got to connect things that are happening, and you've got to figure out how you can allow the athletes to have the best opportunities, but also regulate it for the good of the sport. And at the moment, we've got to think about the good of the athletes first, but there's also a good of the sport that at times, I don't want to say it's in conflict with the athletes, but they're separate paths, and you should be able to walk both paths successfully. And for a long time, we only walked the path of what was good for the sport because nobody cared about what was good for the players because they were amateurs and they had no voice. So thank goodness those times are gone. But now we can't have it that absolutely it's all about everything that a player can do because there's competitive balance that matters. There's roster building that matters. It's not as important as the health and welfare of 18 to 22-year-olds, but it's a component of this, and you've got to work that out. So it's big picture stuff that Charlie Baker has to figure out on a granular level, and they're behind because they've ignored their job for years. So you got a lot to do, Charlie. Good luck, man.
Doug, it's funny when you say connecting college football and all the work that needs to be done and who the next NCAA president is. I think of someone who has connected the country through college football, and that's Ben Chase, one of our other guests. And Ben, I know when you joined NIL Now, you talked a little bit about some of the NIL deals that you saw on the road and some of your favorites. I'm wondering if you have any new ones, Ben. If you have any favorites that still stand out as far as NIL things that you've seen on the road and during your journeys.
Yeah, thanks. So for those who probably didn't listen to that or haven't, I've just been traveling. I've seen a lot of NIL engagements and activations from student athletes having merchandise in the stadium during games, at Syracuse and other schools, and now it's one of those things where you see a lot of creativity that it's outside of the collectives. Which, at that point, when it comes to collectives, what do they say? The toothpaste is out of the container for that. So that'll be something that we have to figure out. And I'm sure that it seems like it's trending towards some kind of collective bargaining. I don't know if that's the answer, but It seems like a lot of people in the industry believe it is. When it comes to deals, I really like some of the opportunities around. I mean, I'm sure you guys saw Tennessee's receiver Hyatt with the Hyatt deal for all the student athletes and their parents. Ironically, he opted out of the bowl game, but he's covering all the hotels for the families, and I thought that was a really clever idea. There's people out here that or there's student athletes out here that have done some really fun things between board games. We have Gator gymnasts doing board games, and you have the Tate the linebacker kind of thing that was played off for that dentist. And then you had like the guy Deuce that did the commercial where he's looking to drop a deuce and he's going to all these porta potties. There's a lot of creativity out there, and then you have collectives that pay student athletes to go do charity work too, and that's like a kind of a gray area on what I enjoy, but I do appreciate when student athletes are back and be giving back. So those are a few of the examples I've seen, and it's one of those things where it's ever growing, and the more and more companies are kind of seeing the value. And a lot of these athletes have hundreds of thousands of followers, and for example I think they just did what Bryce Young and Caleb Williams are doing a deal with Celsius, and that's a big deal. But Celsius is already doing deals with influencers on TikTok, huge influencers that have bigger followings than them. So it's just like par for the course, right? So like it grabs a headline that they're doing a deal with these student athletes, but it is there. These guys have brands and influences, and that's just part of it, and that's where it's just going to be a regular thing at this point.
Folks, I just wanted to also say this as a Reddit Talk. We'd love to hear from you out there. So if you want, just raise your hand. We'd love to hear your thoughts on. Obviously, we're talking a lot about NIL. We've got a couple of good guests up here with expansive experience on the topic. If you raise your hand, we'll have you join this conversation. We'll bring you up to the stage. But I just wanted to mention that because we don't want to dominate all of this conversation. This is as much about you as it is about our guests. So please, if you get a chance, hit that button. But outside of that, Ben, I'm just curious. So what has been your favorite? Because I mean, you're doing this big trip, this big kind of fun project and opportunity to go all over the country and take that chance and take that put in that effort to do so. What has been your favorite stadium so far? I'm sure you get asked that a lot.
Yeah, and it's kind of a cop out to say like the newest stadium in the country, San Diego State, is like breathtaking. So besides that one, it's one of those.
Wait. I got to ask you, what time of year did you go to that stadium? Because I know the first game was
yeah. So I know that the first game was terrible with the heat and like they didn't have enough water. I think I went week 9. Yeah, so week 9 of the season, whatever time of the year that was, probably right before Halloween or right after Halloween. I was at the Utah UCLA game that morning and then went to that game at night. So it was a beautiful night game. And they have a lot of cool kind of like special areas, and they have this cool like deck area that I liked. And then, I mean, there's stadiums that are, I've been to the oldest stadium in the country at Harvard and the newest stadium in the country in San Diego State, obviously polar opposite sides of the country, and all in between. I've enjoyed, I was actually pleasantly surprised at Prairie View A&M Stadium, beautiful stadium right outside of Houston for HBCU there. And although they didn't win the game, I learned that the U.S. Olympic track team, like the outdoor track team practices there. So they have the most state-of-the-art track field, like outdoor practices. So that was really cool. So some incredible games, and seeing Army Navy, I was just there. That was the last game I was at. Like that's probably in the top 5 games I've been to as well.
Ben, I got to ask, as we're on the topic of stadiums, what did you think about the new, I want to say it's JMA Wireless Dome up in Syracuse? I haven't been since I graduated, but how, you got to fill me in. How was it?
Sorry, can you repeat it one more time?
Sure. The stadium up in Syracuse, I haven't been since I graduated.
Oh, yeah.
How was that? How'd you like your experience up there?
So, that was Syracuse against Virginia. Syracuse was down, I think they're down 2 scores and came back to win the game against Virginia. Like a really close game, 24-21 or something. And honestly, for dome stadiums, I've been to Saint Stadium and some others. Like, it's very similar to New Orleans, not on the capacity, like the scale, but it gets loud quickly in there. And I was super, super, surprised and shocked at how quick. I mean, that was when they were 5-0. So that was like still, when that came in hot, right? They finished 6-6, but they were still like, I think they were about to be ranked the next week, and they were getting the atmosphere was pretty surprising. And I mean, that was one of the stadiums that had NIL merchandise inside too. So that was kind of cool to take a lap and take that all in.
Awesome. Doug, one thing that we've talked a lot about on the show, especially with the transfer portal and how NIL plays into that, is this new, people consider the transfer portal now almost like free agency. How collectives, we saw a lot of collectives gearing up, fundraising right before, the transfer portal opened to lure any top recruits who would be entering the transfer portal who maybe wanted to make a buck and cash out through NIL. Do you see it kind of as free agency now? Is that what it takes to bring in some of the top recruits who already say, I'm hitting the transfer portal, I'm not going to be playing here anymore? Is that kind of what pushes these guys to commit to the next level? Is how much NIL money they could be getting?
I don't know if we've seen a lot of that yet. I mean, most of the guys that you see are still, I think, at the top level are driven by an opportunity to level up to a bigger program, a more successful program, or are motivated by playing time. So, I think you look at Alabama this year, and Jahmyr Gibbs, their running back, came from Georgia Tech, and I think their left tackle came from Vanderbilt. And, they got Jamison Williams from Ohio State a couple years ago because Jamison Williams wasn't playing as much at Ohio State as he wanted to, and he went to Alabama, and he becomes a top 15 pick in the NFL draft. So, I think the Jordan Addison example, which I think is the most prolific example of that so far, he, I think, had more NIL opportunities at USC, but it's also USC and Lincoln Riley, right? So the thing I'm most curious about is sometimes when maybe we'll see players who it's not something about their NFL future. It's not necessarily about playing time. It's not necessarily about going to a more successful program, but they make a decision and you think, okay, that I can really feel the NIL influence in that decision, that maybe that person would not have made that decision without NIL. I'm sure there are people in this discussion who would point out and say, well, what about this guy? And be like, yeah, you're right. But it doesn't feel like that's the overwhelming thing right now, where it is pure, unadulterated NIL in the transfer portal. And I know coaches have, they're telling stories of, oh, guys in our roster are getting all these offers and being tampered with. They're getting offers from other schools. And that's certainly there. But I still think there's a lot of football involved in those transfer portal decisions, and not only to the highest bidder, but obviously NIL is a factor in that. I think in the high school recruiting, we are possibly seeing more decisions where you say, in the end, what got a player over the top to pick that school? And you would say NIL seems like that may have been the number one factor in that choice. Yes, it's also a great school, a great program, a great opportunity, but NIL led the way there. And I don't know if we're seeing that NIL is the number one thing quite as much in the transfer portal yet.
Boy, dog, dude, I just let you up here. What's up? We'd love to hear from you.
Hey, I was wondering what you guys think are some of the more creative NIL deals that have gone down. I know a lot of brands are starting to get, fun-loving and more creative with the deals that they're cutting with players. But what do you guys think? What are some of the cooler ones you've seen?
I would like to hear more about the drop a deuce thing. That was new to me. So I don't know. Could you get more creative than drop a deuce and go to porta potties? I didn't know about that until this thing. So I don't know, but Ben, that's got to be number one on the list, right?
Yeah, I mean, so it was a player named Deuce, and he was looking to go to the bathroom at a porta potty, and he went to one, and it was another player's porta potty, and I think and then the last porta potty, it said Deuce is welcome, and that's his name, and obviously that's kind of a play on dropping a deuce. Obviously, you have Dakotas Crawford, who signed with the HVAC's company for Nebraska, but he's in the transfer portal now, so that's kind of funny. Maybe he'll find another HVAC company somewhere.
He actually withdrew his name today, so he's going to stick with Nebraska as far as
I know. Okay. So he got some more HVAC deals. I really like. I think baby. My favorite. One of my favorites is the Bijan Musterson, and I actually had that outside of. So it was funny. I went to Alabama, Texas, and outside the stadium, there was a guy selling hot dogs with Bijan Musterson and dressed in a giant Bijan Musterson outfit. So I was a big fan of that, and I had to eat a few hot dogs because Florida lost that week against Kentucky. But there's a lot of cool ones like that. Like I said earlier, I mean, you have gymnasts with their own board game and different like plays on words. I really liked the dentist one where, you know, he was like doing like the linebacker dentist thing, like that old, I think it's like Terry Tate, like linebacker. So those are some of the ones I liked.
You know, I'd say my favorite was Hendon Hooker getting that deal with French's Mustard, where they didn't just do French's Mustard. They got him a custom pair of Nikes that, you know, I think they're Air Force Ones that have that literal mustard drip coming off the swoosh. And they're actually surprisingly tasteful. They have a custom box that's got a bit of that French's design. You know, I'm going to look. I know we shared it on our CFB, but I'm going to look for the article, one of the articles I have handy here, actually from AL.com, as it turns out. I'll drop that in the messages for this post just so y'all can see it. It's the work on the shoe design is absolutely phenomenal. I'm not even a sneakerhead, and I think they've got that. You know, as they say, you know, they got that drip.
Yeah, no, and the play on that was because that was when they threw mustard on the field last year, right? And it was like, who brings mustard? Is that what it was from? Like a play on that?
Because it was a whole bottle. Yeah, that was what was. There was a whole side story about that because it was. I don't think Neyland Stadium even had bottles of French's mustard, like in the like. Somebody must have actually brought that one because it didn't appear to have come from the concessions area.
Yeah, I actually agree with you, Bobak, and I was a little upset when you took my favorite NIL deal that we've talked about on the podcast. But I think with the story with Lane Kiffin, just the whole story about Tennessee and the mustard was just amazing in and of itself. You know, the former coach is at the field and someone throws the mustard bottle. We all know it by now. But that was great. And then for the quarterback to have, you know, I don't want to say any Heisman thing here, but, you know, the quarterback for him to have a terrific year the next year, and then French's actually signed some was awesome. And then, Ben, what you were saying about DeColdis Crawford, I guess I also didn't know that he put his name into the portal. But when he was in the portal, I was looking at, and obviously he has that, you know, viral HVAC NIL deal now. But when he was in the portal, a lot of Syracuse fans who were still on my Twitter, a lot of Syracuse fans were calling for DeColdis to come to Syracuse because Central New York is often DeColdis, and that would have taken, you know, it would have gone hand in hand.
Well, do you know that
I do like those.
The Carrier Dome didn't have AC until they got their new sponsor, and now they have AC.
Facts.
Isn't that
I learned that.
Those beautiful legacies, because I'm an attorney too, and one of my favorite stories is I believe Houston's basketball stadium and the Carrier Dome were two of the oldest naming rights deals. So at the time they seemed like they were blockbuster deals, but now they were like piddly squat. But they gave almost lifetime naming rights to these facilities. So both, I believe, Houston's basketball facility and then the Carrier Dome had to kind of first sort out, okay, how do we extricate ourselves from this naming rights deal? But then, of course, the awkward part on top of it was they didn't put AC in the Carrier Dome. And that I remember the first time I found that out years ago, someone's like, oh, it gets really hot in there. I'm like, oh my gosh, why?
Yeah, going off that, Bobak, they signed that deal like way before the Carrier Dome being so old, or I guess the JMA Wireless Dome now. But they signed it so long ago that, you know, all of these naming rights deals that we see for all this crazy money, Syracuse University like totally got lowballed on you know, how much you know, that they got paid for the naming rights. But yeah, I do like the deals where it fits with the player's name, and we talked about that a little bit on NIL Now, where, you know, DeColdis Crawford, Jalen Hyatt signs with you know, the hotels. There was also something during October that I think we mentioned in one of the episodes, but there was, you know, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups signed, I want to say it was 12 to 13, somewhere around there, a group of college football players to the Reese's team, and all of their last names were Reese. So in a way, you could be strategic on, you know, when you're naming a child and you want them to be a college football player, maybe it needs to be like, you know, Verizon Jones, or it needs to be, you know, Apple Ferguson. I don't know, but maybe you do need to think about that. You know, if you're hoping your kid plays college football, maybe you need to name them after something that they could benefit from in the future.
I just want to also add a clarification. It looks like the report that DeColdis had pulled his name out of the portal was later updated to say that they still remain in. So that might have been apparently a premature article. That's the thing when with RCFB, people toss things up as soon as they appear on Twitter or whatever news source, and sometimes it'll be debunked, and that I think is one of them. But we'll see. Maybe he will go. Maybe there is a chance to go to Syracuse, or gosh, why not just skip it all together and go to Minnesota and play in the wonderful outdoors out here? It's been snowing all day here. It's wonderful.
Or he can go to somewhere hot and become the coldest.
Nice.
Right. That'll be interesting. I'm sure Reddit will be all over that commitment. Doug, one thing I wanted to ask you about with your knowledge on Ohio State and the top football programs, or one of the top football programs in the country, there was something that came out weeks ago where Robert Griffin III, talking on ESPN during one of his segments, said that Bijan Robinson, the star running back at Texas that Ben had just mentioned, he'd have a decision coming up, as a lot of athletes do in college football, whether they wanted to go pro or return for another year. And RG3 suggested that, Texas collectives, they need to come together and offer him, a ton of money to make it worth him coming back for another year rather than going to the NFL. I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Do you think that we'll potentially see that, especially with the bigger schools where, these are players that are really changing the program, and having them for another year could be worth, whatever it is, the $7-8 million that a collective would have to raise?
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever see it with guys who are as talented as Bijan and are going to be clear first-round picks. Because when you go to the NFL, that first-round pick money, and everybody, you want to get to the NFL so you can start your clock, right, and get your first contract sooner, which means you'll get your second contract sooner. And the second contract is where the big money is really made. So you will never, I would guess, you will never see first-round picks decide to stay in college football because it is more profitable to do so. Could it have an effect on a guy who is thinking about it, has a year of eligibility left, but is projected as a 4th or 5th round pick? Could you cobble something together that would make that player think about staying in college for the money? Which, again, think about just that idea compared to where we were. Maybe, but also you're also threading a needle a little bit of how good is that player? He's so important to your college football program, yet he's not going to be a 1st or 2nd round pick in the NFL. What exactly does that look like? I think we know what that would look like. There are players who are better college football players than they might be NFL prospects. But in terms of Bijan, no. Sorry, RG3. No, that's never going to happen.
Yeah, and then look at college basketball. There's going to be opportunities for 4th or 5th year seniors, and there's a few out there that you could probably see came back that they're testing the waters, and they may get drafted in the 2nd round. Which I think if you're getting drafted in the 2nd round and you make a team, your salary is like $250,000. But if you're an impact player in college basketball, you can your representation can go out there and try to sell you to the highest bidder to stay for another year or be a grad transfer. And that's something I think you'll see a lot of 23, 24-year-old, 5th or 6th year doctoral candidates that could test the waters internationally, but could also become local, small basketball town legends because a little longer than
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think you both brought up good points, Doug, specifically with, the shelf life of Bijan as a running back. NFL, not for long, and especially that position and how, the sport has changed and how they're utilizing running backs in the NFL. But you're totally right. I mean, why would you spend another year playing football in college where, you're not making the big bucks as you would as someone who is, most definitely going to go 1st round? This isn't a question of, if this person's going to get drafted, if it's going to be worth, is there a possibility they could fall and they won't get, as much money as they were hoping for? I think that potentially, who knows, right? And it depends on how much a person loves a school, how much they love playing college football. I think that specific example of Bijan is pretty cut and dry, and it would take a lot of money to keep him from going into the NFL. But I think it is interesting and definitely something you'll see with basketball. Ben, that was a good point that, there are only so many players who get drafted in basketball and how many are actually going to make an impact in the NBA or have an opportunity to make an impact, right away.
Yeah. And further, I would say that, and this is something I don't know the awareness on, but when it comes to other college athletics at these schools that have pride, for example, Nebraska has one of the best volleyball teams in the history of college athletics, or Penn State has, wrestling, or John Hopkins has lacrosse. The schools that have historic programs in non-revenue sports or sports that we don't highlight here, college football, college basketball, there will be collectives built out from prominent alumni that care about those programs, and those will be very evident when it comes to they're going to continue to dominate in those sports because they'll have, there'll probably be 3 collectives in the lacrosse space or 6 collectives in the wrestling space. So every wrestler is going to just continue to go to those schools going forward.
I do think college basketball, with the ability for players to leave after a year, I feel like I've covered players in my time who had a draft decision and maybe thought, if I stayed another year, I kind of would like to stay. I don't think I'm fully developed. I think I might be a first-round pick right now, but I think with another year, I could be a higher first-round pick. But I feel like I have to go now because I have the opportunity to help my family, and my family could use the help now. And I don't want to make them wait a year when I can make a difference in the lives of the people that I care about the most. If you have a player like that, and again, that's different from basketball and football because you've got to wait for 3 years in football anyway. But a college basketball player like that, if you said, maybe in the past I felt like I had to go. Now I can stay because I can get enough money now to do what I want to do in terms of that, while also growing my game, putting myself in a better position. Maybe I still kind of just want to be here. I'm not really ready to be a professional yet. I do think those are circumstances where you could have players who are very talented and in the past I've always said, if you're a first-round pick, it's almost not a decision, right, for either sport. It's like, well, what do you want to do? It doesn't matter what you want to do. You got to go. You got to go get the money now because you don't know what the future holds in terms of your performance, especially in terms of health and that kind of thing. But I do think in basketball especially, you might see guys who in the past felt like they didn't have a choice, might have a choice if the money to stay for a second year is enough.
One thing I've found a bit intriguing in kind of doing those kinds of numbers, obviously someone like Caleb Williams isn't going to necessarily stay an extra year for even $4 or $5 million because the NFL is going to pay them a lot more and they'll be able to jump into that. But I keep thinking of historically some of the players who even made won a Heisman or were in the Heisman, finalists who never got drafted or were, went as free agents, like Brad Banks of Iowa. He came second to Carson Palmer. Jason White won the Heisman, and then, he was a finalist following year, and just his knees were just unfortunately took a beating throughout his career. And if we get players like that who probably won't be NFL draft worthy, and at this point, they've tried to improve that and give players who are thinking about leaving early sort of a realistic draft forecast to kind of improve that. But I think those are the players I'm most intrigued by, the ones who have the talent but may not have the potential or the longevity that the NFL desire. And will they still, however, be able to get some serious, 6 and 7 figure deals to sweeten that career that otherwise would have been a bunch of pats on the back and then maybe, an insurance job or, the classic, the old adages that would happen to some of those players before this new kind of world they're in. Before I forget, let's see, we have another guest up here. Moose Upset, one of our callers. We'd love to hear from you. What's up?
Yeah, no, this is for Doug. So curious, have you heard from any of the Ohio State players who were involved with the tattoo gate from the 2010 team, and just how, now they had so many repercussions, what their thoughts are on, NIL and how it's changing the game?
I know there was a great reaction from them immediately when NIL passed. The idea that this thing that they were ostracized for, and for instance, they're not in the record books, right? They had that season wiped out. It's not acknowledged by the NCAA as part of the sanctions from what happened. That 2010 season's wiped out. They expressed that idea of at least, it's like the Reggie Bush conversation, right? It at least let us, get back the things that we earned, those things were taken away from us. And again, it's records, but those things matter. It's part of your legacy that now would be okay. Right. So I think those players, that generation of players, yes, I think they are happy for again, these guys have expressed this. They're happy for the fact that we got here, that the sport is now at this point. But I do think they hold some, I don't know if animosity is the right word, or kind of the idea of why were you freaking out? Why were we penalized? Why were we punished for things that even in that time period was really just, was it so egregious? It did, everyone's got to follow the rules that exist in society at the moment, and things are always changing. But even back then, it wasn't, a lot of people thought that those rules were silly then. So, yeah, I do think they're glad this happened, but they also would like some acknowledgement of maybe the things that they were punished for back then. Maybe some of those penalties can be lifted now that the sport has seen the light.
Doug, I have another question for you. One thing that we talked recently about on the podcast was, overarching with new coaches, and right around this time, you see, coaches leaving one job for another. But one thing that I really found interesting was Matt Rule, who coached last in college at Baylor, goes to the NFL, and now he's back. He'll be the coach at Nebraska, or he is the coach at Nebraska now. So a lot has changed since the last time he was in college football. I see a lot of college coaches are coming out and saying, NIL is here. We need to adapt to it. We need to, play into the whole collective game and make sure that, our student athletes are, getting paid what they're worth, kind of thing. And that we have the funds to compete with other schools. For someone just getting into, not that it's, very common for, a coach to just jump into college football right now. But for Rule, or for any coach that's starting out at a new school, what are some of the most important things that they need to understand, or things that they need to accomplish early on in the NIL game?
I think in the past, when a college football coach was thinking about a job, you would always think about, who's my AD? Do I trust my AD? Do they support the program? That support means money. Will they do the things that I feel like we need to do to compete? Do I trust my university president? Will they allow us to do the things that I think we need to do to compete? Will we build facilities? Will we be proactive? Will we be, pushing the envelope to give our players everything we can give them? And I do think now, I don't know if you have to work, who are my collectives? Do we have collectives in place? How aggressive are they? How much money have they raised? Do our fans open their pocketbooks for this? How aggressive are our administrators in terms of promoting the collective? It's a real idea of, because you can't do it yourself. You can't, not that they would, the coaches want to keep their money, but they can't say, well, here's, I'm making $9 million here. Here's $3 million of my bucks. Here, let's go get some recruits. They can't do that. They need they're beholden to these outside forces. So you have to have a handle on your outside forces, how they're run and what they're doing and how effective they can be, and primarily how much money they can raise and then give out. So I do think, that is going to become something that matters more and more, because if you feel like those collectives are vital for the procurement of talent, then they are going to have some effect on the success of your program. Maybe not the ultimate effect, but some effect. And so I'm sure, that was not something that Matt Rule was thinking about at Baylor. And I'm sure it's something that he has to think about now at Nebraska. And again, this idea, we're right in this window here in December. The transfer portal is open, right? Because now they made the rule, you can't just do it anytime you want. There's certain transfer windows. So we're in a portal window. It's National Signing Day next Wednesday. And by the way, you're trying to get ready for a bowl game, and the 4 teams that are in the playoffs are still trying to win a national championship. I said this the other day to Ryan Day. It would be like if the NFL had its draft and its free agency window right as the playoffs were starting. And you were trying to build your roster for next year while you were also trying to win a championship right now. And this is the NCAA calendar, and the transfer portal and NIL has complicated all of that. So all those coaches, every coach you talk to, has said they are spending so much more time on NIL, on the transfer portal, less time on the football. And I think that drives all of them crazy. Again, they'll be fine. They can make millions of dollars, but there's a lot of time and energy and angst spent on that because it matters so much. And it just so happens that the way the calendar works is it's happening all at the same time right now.
Doug, I have to follow up on this because you cover Ohio sports, obviously focused on Ohio State, but you know how the colleges or the college dynamic there, because it makes me think of Cincinnati, because obviously the unexpected hire poached, by Wisconsin, but suddenly they bring in Scott Satterfield, which was a bit of a surprise from Louisville. But at the same time, we were seeing the reports of the Cincy Reigns collective that Cincinnati was forming to support the athletes. I mean, the collective is to support the athletics there. How much, was that an example of a program having a good collective system put in place, or one that might have been attractive to pull in what seems like a lateral hire from another P5 program?
I do think, again, I think from some of the reporting around the departure of Luke Fickell to Wisconsin, obviously Wisconsin's a Big Ten job. It's a bigger job than Cincinnati, although Cincinnati just made the playoff. I think some collective NIL things factored into that just because, again, it's harder. The underdog, it's like one more thing for the underdogs. You're fighting uphill. Now you're also, fighting the collective battle if you're not keeping up with that. But I do think, to your point about a move for Scott Satterfield like that, again, I think that has to factor in because all of it, support matters, right? Because if the more people support you, the better your chances of winning. And if you don't win, you're going to get fired. You can't do it by yourself most of the time. Some of the best guys can, but you really can't do it by yourself. You have to have the things in place to allow you to compete. And so collectives are now part of that discussion. And the odd part of that is not something that the university can do. That is not something that your direct bosses can do. And I find that to be the most incongruous part of all of this, as this is an absolutely vital part of player acquisition and roster building in college sports. And they're run by outsiders. It's not even outsourced because you don't have any real say in who's doing it. It's just these people. Now, they're booths, they're people who care about the program. They know who they are, but they're becoming so important, but they're not directly connected to the universities is just weird. But I'm sure someone like Scott Satterfield, when he's considering a change in jobs, I'm sure that matters.
Bobak, there was something about that hire that made it more interesting than just a regular hire, right? Aren't Louisville and Cincinnati playing one another and they're sharing?
Oh yeah, they're playing in the Fenway Bowl. So I believe Satterfield is not going to be at the game, but yeah, and they're rivals historically. They play for the Keg and Nails. So there's a lot of history between Louisville and Cincy back when they were, before G5 was a moniker, when we used to just say mid-majors in football. They were together, and then both of them have moved up. Obviously, Louisville got the invite earlier to join the ACC, and now Cincinnati's going to be a part of the Big 12. So both of those programs have been on the rise, and gosh knows Cincinnati has had a history of churning out coaches who've gone on to be hired by giant P5 programs, and now they are one. So we'll see how that works. But it was, as Doug mentioned, fascinating to watch that dynamic of, are we seeing, and we really are seeing the two big super conferences with the SEC and Big Ten pulling in money that lets them throw a little bit more than perhaps the middle 3-5, or I don't know, the middle P, the middle 3P. I have no idea how to phrase it, but we're definitely seeing a bit more of that ability to poach from them.
But they can't throw that money at NIL.
Oh, indeed.
Which is weird, right? Which is happening right now. It's that all these schools, and again, I was asking people about this, big windfall TV contract for the Big Ten coming down the pike. And my idea was, okay, if you're a place like Ohio State, you're getting all this TV money. You also get donations to your athletic department. Would you maybe tell the people giving money to your athletic department, hey, we're cool. We've got all this TV money. We actually don't need your money as much right now. Give your money to a collective instead. Because we, with all our TV money, can't pay the players directly, but we can make enough money that we don't need your donation. So you give your donation to somebody else who then can pay the players, right? It's almost like money laundering. So that was my idea. And when I presented that to people, they're like, no. Like, we still want the donations. So these athletic departments, they make all this money, but the minute a nickel comes in, they spend it. So that's where fans are stuck. And I think the fans are an important part of this NIL discussion. I've talked to a lot of fans who are frustrated because they feel like we buy season tickets, we buy jerseys, we support our program. Now you're also asking us for money to give the collective so we can get good players. But if I give $100 to the athletic department every year, who should I give it to? Should I not give it to the athletic department? Should I give it to a collective instead? Like, tell me what to do, because we have this ridiculous Frankenstein's monster of a system that doesn't make any sense, that's been completely backwards jerry-rigged, and people want their teams to be good, and they want to support them, but they can't even figure out how to do it, and you're supposed to write a check to a 501c3 collective that you don't even really know who's running it or who they're accountable to, but you're hoping that money might get to a high school recruit? Like, it's nuts. But also, by the way, the athletic department still wants your money too.
I honestly, as someone who has formed a 501c3, because we did here at RCFB, we now have a 501c3 charitable organization that we formed. I don't know how these NILs are going to be able to stick that out. I am waiting for that veil to get pierced and all of them to lose their status at some point. I'm not waiting. I'm not saying it's inevitable, but I wouldn't be shocked, because that is one the charitable aims that they're doing with some of these are specious, to put it mildly. Goodness. And by the way, to another point, I remember, because we donate money again at RCFB, talking to someone in one of the major departments of, I'm not going to name the school, but one of the top blue blood programs. And he said, we're having a bad day if we don't raise $1 million a day. Because our university raises well over $365 million a year in donations. And for them, and then to hear a school like that say, like, oh, but hey, we need you to give money to this. It's hitting, I think, a fair number of fans and alumni as a bit tone deaf. But we'll see. The market is what the market is, and we'll see if people do respond to it and continue the donations at that level.
Talking about the Fenway Bowl made me realize that I want to change my favorite NIL deal that we've seen this year, if that's all right with you guys. I think that the Cheez-It Bowl, the Cheez-It rooms for the players, the 4 players who will be sleeping in Cheez-It hotel rooms so they can wake up feeling the cheesiest. I think that is my favorite deal. Now, Ben, if you're going to the Cheez-It Bowl, what are the chances? I feel like the chances have to be pretty high that we can get you a room in one of the Cheez-It rooms. So are you going to that game?
I wish I was going to that game. Unfortunately, I'm not. I wish I could get. I wouldn't mind having somewhere. There's a few places I would. One of the I wish that one of the Detroit one of these bowls that will cover my car expenses would be great. But no, I won't be in the Cheez-It Bowl, even though it's in Orlando. The only bowl in Orlando I'm going to be at is tomorrow's the Cure Bowl. Unfortunately.
Do we think that we can somehow get you on the phone with Cheez-It and get you a night stay in the Cheez-It hotel rooms? How would that sound?
I mean, that would be pretty cool. If anyone has any connections to the national championship, I would love a ticket and not have to pay $1,300. But besides that, I was actually supposed to do an NIL deal with Applebee's, but it's still on hold because it's the holiday season. So we're out here grinding on my own too, trying to show these athletes that anyone can tell a story, not just the starting quarterback. I apologize about the background noise. I'm on life on the road. I had to run into a coffee shop because my audio wasn't great outside.
No worries. Bobak, you were saying when we mentioned the Cheez-It rooms on NIL Now, you were saying something about forgetting your bit or your take on the Cheez-It scented pillows or something along those lines, which I don't know if I can get behind.
Well, I think they should go full on with everything. I think if that alarm clock doesn't yell, cheese, cheese, cheese when they wake up and completely ensconce them in the complete Cheez-It experience. Yeah, let's have cheese scented soaps. Part of me is also, I know we talked about it on the show, but part of me is a little worried about the routines that some of these players may have. I mean, how are they going to pick which 4 get those rooms? Can you imagine somebody has a very set game day plan that they always do, and then, oh, by the way, you're going to be thrown in the Cheez-It room? Not sure how that's going to go, but yeah, I hope they go completely off the wall. I hope they figure out some way to make the entire floor smell like them. There's got to be ways to do it. If stores can make their shopping experience have a particular odor, why can't you do that for an entire hotel floor? And I'm sure the people who are just staying at the hotel because they didn't realize there was a minor bowl game happening will absolutely appreciate it.
I'm just thinking about the starting quarterback staying in one of the Cheez-It rooms and having his whole, schedule on how he wants to wake up and everything. And then the cheese alarm clock goes off, and the team ends up losing by a lot. That's all I can think about now. So thank you for putting that thought in my head, Bobak. But I guess as long as it's not, because there's a Mayo Bowl now too, right? Where there's
Duke Mayo, yeah, absolutely. They have a lot of fun over there.
Yeah. So I guess as long as you're not waking up in like a vat of mayo, I think you could maybe just deal with the Cheez-It wake up.
Oh yeah, the vat of mayo is for the winning coach. They dump it on the head, and hopefully we'll see that again return this year. And it's a funny conversation with what they had to do to get that done. The Panthers were not thrilled with the idea of having it done on the field, so they have to go just off the field onto concrete, so that any mayo even though they even put a tarp down, there's no chance of any mayo actually touching their field. That was a point of months of negotiation between the bowl and the stadium.
One thing that I found interesting that we actually brought up earlier, but I guess we can segue to it now, is earlier in the week when we recorded our episode, we had talked about how Tennessee and Pennsylvania had just passed legislation so that high school athletes can make money off their NIL. And I know that we talk a lot about, the high school recruits, NIL changing, swaying their decisions on where they want to go to school, where they're going to commit to college and play, in the NCAA, rather than, the athletes themselves in high school just making money, as the high school quarterback, as, the high school kicker. And even since then, another state, I want to say it's Maryland, added their name to, I think there are 26 states now. Don't quote me on that, but they're right around there with states who now have legal legislation for high school athletes to make money off their NIL. Doug, I wanted to ask you what you thought about high school players making money off their NIL. Obviously, this has kind of trickled down, and it's almost creating like a system where, if players can make money on NIL in high school, and then, obviously they can make money in college. I guess, what are your thoughts on high school players making money now too?
Yeah, they're humans, right? So they should probably be able to make money. This was obviously an issue when Quinn Ewers reclassified 2 years ago and came to Ohio State last year as a freshman, because in Texas at that time, where he was a high school athlete, you couldn't make NIL money as a high school athlete. So he was like, okay, I won't be a high school athlete anymore. And he came to Ohio State for a year and then transferred back to Texas. And I always say, like, he transferred to Columbus High School for a year. So he made like $1 million in NIL because Texas wouldn't let him do it. So, it feels like high school federations. I actually had a thing with my daughter who transferred high schools for academic reasons. And we wound up in like an hour-long hearing with a bunch of lawyers from our school district so she could play high school tennis, because they had rules about transfers and you had to sit out a year. It's like, it's just an academic program and she wants to play tennis. So high school federations are often overly sensitive. Competitive balance matters. And it's the thing about everybody who wants like a completely wide open system for everybody to do whatever they want to do. It's like, okay, well then you're going to affect the competitive balance, and that is important to sports. So I do think you should be able to make money, but I'm sure, and I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on it, but should high school athletes, everyone's worried about transfers and that kind of thing. That's been an issue in high school sports forever. Can another school offer you NIL to then come to that school and you'll get it there? And then all of a sudden, I think that's probably what they care about more. If you're just a kid at your school and somebody at a donut shop wants to give you money because people think you're a good athlete, great. I hope people aren't standing in the way of that. But again, because it's all connected, which again, the NCAA should be able to figure out. It's all connected. Player movement and paying players is connected because you move to go get the money. So I think you shouldn't limit the money, but I don't think it's totally unreasonable to limit the movement, or at least connect the money and the movement in a way that allows some structure and regulation. So I think on a high school level, let them make money. But does that mean that high schools can buy you to come to their school to play a sport. I don't know. Maybe you should have some regulation on that.
Yeah, and when we think about, obviously NIL and what this general discussion is all about is how much it's impacting college football, and most of those deals that are actually impacting the sport are these major, massive, quarterbacks making, millions and millions of dollars, and just players. We know what the discussion's about. What we talked about on this week's episode, Kevin Jones, who one of our co-hosts, was the top high school recruit in his class in 2001 when he was playing high school football in the state of Pennsylvania. And one thing that he brought up, one thing that him and I both agreed on is, yes, we're used to these massive deals, but, NIL can be used as a good thing, especially at a local level in high schools where, this can be a way for the quarterback to promote a local business. This could be a way for, athletes to begin to brand themselves and promote themselves. That can help with recruiting. So when I look at high school athletes getting paid from NIL, I like to think of it as a good thing. I like to think of it as, hopefully this is going to be something where a lot of people benefit, and it's not just, college football fans eventually getting upset because someone chose $1 million at one school versus another.
Yeah. So I think we've been going for now a little over an hour. Should we go ahead and start wrapping up, do you think, Dean?
Yeah, I think
I got off.
Yeah.
Well, this was, I think, an interesting inaugural show to see how this worked. It was really interesting. We appreciate those of you who joined us, as well as our guests here on stage. I just wanted to say that. I'll allow Dean to wrap up and thank our two guests. I think that was really interesting. It was fun to get those perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bobak, thank you for, kind of taking the reins with the intro and then segueing this. Really appreciate it. And all the help that, you and the Reddit team have helped us out with on the show. Ben, thank you so much. I realize you're on the road, and we all love following your journey and appreciate you, coming on the show and then joining this today. And Doug, thank you again as well. Always appreciate your insight. We look forward to your coverage coming up in the bowl game and what's to come. And, always appreciate you helping us out. And for everyone else, thank you guys for joining and listening to the show, or the Reddit Talk, I guess. You can find NIL Now, the podcast, where you will listen to Bobak and sometimes me, but mostly our other co-hosts. We release our episodes every Thursday, and they are out wherever you listen to your podcasts. So thank you guys all so much for joining. Really appreciate it. And this was great.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. And hopefully we're back on here later and maybe next month.
Thanks, everybody. And you can try my other podcast, the College Football Survivor Show, where we talk about football, not money.
Yeah, you got Shehan on that show. He was one of our first guests we ever had, Shehan Diraja. He's a great guy.
He's wonderful. Yeah, I love doing it with him. So yeah, we would invite anybody to try the College Football Survivor Show. All
right. I guess we'll then go ahead and wrap up. We're going to let our good friends at Reddit wrap us up. I'm here with RCFB. We'll see you all next time. I think we're going to be doing these every other week, ideally. So again, on behalf of all of us, on behalf of myself, on behalf of Dean and our guests, thanks for joining us. Have a great afternoon or evening, whatever time zone you're in.